from October 8th, New York Times Magazine, about a firm called Kleiner Perkins, a capital firm called Kleiner Perkins. Are you aware of that company?
Well, yes, I'm a partner at Kleiner Perkins.
So you're a partner in Kleiner Perkins. Okay. Now, they have invested about $1 billion in 40 companies that are going to benefit from cap-and-trade legislation. So is the legislation that we are discussing here today, is that something that you are going to personally benefit from?
I believe that the transition to a green economy is good for our economy and good for all of us. And I have invested in it, but every penny that I have made, I have put right into a nonprofit, the Alliance for Climate Protection, to spread awareness of why we have to take on this challenge. And Congresswoman, if you believe that the reason I have been working on this issue for 30 years is because of greed, you don't know me.
No, sir, I'm not making accusations. I'm asking questions that have been asked of me.
The simple answer is money, power, and glory. Let's take Al Gore. Al Gore was a failed presidential candidate. He'd not been a particularly distinguished vice president. He was hated by more or less everybody he came into contact with because he's an arrogant little so-and-so. He's not a nice man. And he was really at the end of his career until he reinvented himself. And from being worth around $2 million when he came out of the Senate, he is now worth $200 million. And that's not just through charging $300,000 a time, which I know the Singapore government is going to pay him next May to go and speak there, because I'm going too, but they're not paying me anything. They want to make a point by having me going free while he goes for $300,000, and they're going to announce it. I don't think he'll like that very much. But the point is, he's making a lot of money, not only out of speaking, but also he's set up a thing called Generation Investment Management. It's London-based. You couldn't do it in Canada because you're very well regulated financially here. It's not an accident that you don't have a banking collapse as we have. And there's no way he could have set this up in Canada. The rules wouldn't have allowed it. He got away with it in London. He's just taken, for instance, the church commissioners of the Church of England for $200 million in so-called investment, in so-called green, so-called technologies. And, of course, every so-called green technology is going to hell in a handcart. It's not actually paying its way. These are the worst kinds of investments for financial return that you can possibly make. So he has a very, very large, very, very direct financial interest in making absolutely sure that everybody ends up believing this global warming scare, because only then will governments subsidize the green technologies to the point where they pay, because they don't pay their own way. They have to be subsidized in order to pay, like windmills, for instance, or solar panels.
Terry, what are you hearing now about what's happening in Copenhagen with the Minister of the Environment?
What's happened now is the horse is out of the barn, and the Minister of the Environment has been forced to basically confirm the story. Although it was based on a cabinet document, and of course he wouldn't discuss a cabinet document, that's not allowed, he nevertheless confirmed that this is indeed what he is considering for one, and that Canada should consider exactly what is in that document, namely that we should harmonize with the U.S., but what does that mean? What is the U.S. plan with which we are going to harmonize? Answer, the only thing we got right now is this bill in the U.S. House, which passed in June, called the Waxman-Markey bill, which basically gives not a holiday, but special treatment to a whole swath of industries that are termed as a more gobbledygook in this business than anything else. It's called energy-intensive trade influenced sectors.
Right.
These are sectors which the bill says need protection from potential competition from other countries which might not have such stringent standards. So we must harmonize with that part of the Waxman-Markey bill, is what Prentice is saying, the minister, Jim Prentice. He's saying we must harmonize with the section of that bill that gives special treatment, protected treatment, to sectors which might suffer from competition, and give that category to the oil sands.
So then this is very significant.
Yeah.
In Copenhagen, as we've seen, The oil sands have been targeted by a lot of protesters. They are key to greenhouse gas emission reductions. In the document you showed us last night, the document said that they're expected to grow in the next 10 years by over 160%. You're saying now that the Environment Minister is confirming that this kind of, I'm going to use the word special status, but it's a different status for the oil sands than for other parts of the country.
Indeed, for the whole oil and gas sector. It's not just the oil sands, but it includes the oil sands, and that, of course, is a big thing for the environmental movement. The fact that it includes everything else only makes it worse, and there's a terribly negative reaction in Copenhagen today from the environmental movement having heard this, and especially since the minister has basically confirmed that, yeah, we've got to consider that. We've got to harmonize with the U.S., and he specifically discussed the Waxman-Markey legislation and the need to consider the oil sands and the oil and gas sector as a whole as so-called trade sensitive.
The Waxman-Markey bill promises to destroy our standard of living and the quality of life with higher energy costs, higher food prices, and lost jobs. The bill is the single largest economic threat to our farmers and ranchers in decades. We have more than 115 agricultural and food groups who have publicly opposed this bill as of today. Madam Speaker, I would ask that the list be entered into the record at the appropriate place.
Without objection, so ordered.
Do you know why? The greatest threat to our agricultural producers is ignored. Under H.R. 2454, input costs will escalate as a direct result of the energy tax. Meanwhile, the markets for their crops will shrink because of foreign competitors whose governments will not place burdens on their farmers. They will be able to undersell us. But what about the billions of dollars annually that farmers are supposed to garner selling offset credits? Many farmers will not be able to participate. Soil sequestration of carbon was going to be the way for farmers to generate credits. But if the producers started soil tillage practices before 2001, they'll be ineligible to participate. The amendment does not exempt agriculture from performance standards in the bill, which means the EPA could tell our producers how to manage their farms. This bill will tax you. This bill will destroy the livelihoods of those who live and work in rural America, those who work every day to consistently provide our nation and the world with a safe, affordable, abundant food supply and fiber supply. Agriculture sits squarely in the crosshairs of this bill because it's energy intensive. Whether it's the fuel for the tractor, the fertilizer for the crops, or the delivery of food to the grocery store, agriculture uses a great deal of energy throughout production and processing. Although USDA hasn't devoted any time or resources to complete economic analysis of how this bill will impact farmers, the Heritage Foundation has. A recent study from the Heritage Foundation revealed that by the year 2035, the average net income for farms will be decreased by 57%. And also by 2035, gasoline and diesel costs are expected to be 58% higher and electric rates 90% higher. For example, residents in Oklahoma can expect their electric rates to increase by nearly $300 million. So why are we doing this bill? So the U.S. can lead on climate change in the world? We can lead when China and India have refused to participate? We can lead when Europe is willing to do half of what this bill calls for? We can lead when the rest of the developing world is unable to do anything at all about climate change? Some of my idealistic colleagues will say we have to set a standard for the rest of the world. But I say I will not make my constituents poorer, so that others can get richer at our expense.
Corruption.